So that was Miss Monique I was listening to, and where was this? It's the 15th of August, and let's see who joins us. Hello, Jim. Hello. I'm just putting together an edit for the introduction to the book. Jim, have you have emailed me, I remember. I need to put you on the list.
Yeah, good. I don't know how to access it yet. I need to learn about all the resources and getting to them. I keep telling myself that.
Yeah, but this is my job to do, not yours, so don't worry. I'm just going to put you on the general mailing list or the community things. Boom,
It's a complex address.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's the same as mine. You are jim@strahorn.com. I'm fro.hegland.com. So yes.
Yep.
Hello, Mark.
Muted.
Let's not complain about that. Just kidding. Hang on, I'm just exporting a file here. Okay, that's done. Get a link. So you have this, Mark, an earlier version, but I've added the beginnings of a kind of a scenario, and I thought it might be interesting if we talk about that as a group. So if you both could click on the link and please download, that would be great.
Rhoda, I'm not sure where I can connect to the link.
Oh, do you mean in Zoom?
Yeah.
There should be somewhere that says, what's it called? Chat. Do you see the chat?
Yes.
In there, there should be a link. I'll post it again, see if it shows up better for
Well,
you.
no, I just haven't been there. I didn't know where it was. So chat, okay. Got it.
Excellent. So strange. Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to leave the meeting briefly to bring it up on a different larger screen so I can work both at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, the idea is that it might be useful. We've talked about this kind of stuff before. I'll put the full text. It's the scenario and the new one. But it won't let me. Oh, this is not very good. Yeah, it's the working VR scenario. If we maybe as a community work on a scenario based on some specific things that can be done in VR and highlight what the issues are, maybe that's more concrete. I don't know. How are you, Mark? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, it'll get my neck's still out of whack. It'll get there, but it's not very good at the moment. I'm sorry about the weekend. I had some relatives of Lizzie's down, and it was a bit full on over the weekend, so I didn't really step out from hosting mode.
Yeah. Have you seen the list of people for this symposium?
Well, you didn't. Isn't I thought you posted? Is that the Google Doc you posted?
Yeah, it's also on our website. So it's Jaron Lanier, Andrea,
Yeah,
Andy Campbell, Annie Murphy-Paul, Bob Horn, Bob Stein, Kathleen Fisher, Fabienne, Jim Holland, Kalev Letourou, Ken Perlin, Mesbreeze, etc. It's really, really good. I'm not listing us here. We're in the kind of curators and stuff. So yeah, coming up. Did that work for you, Jim?
so it looks like there's plugging in going on.
Yeah. I got an email from the Atlantic this morning and it's disappeared. It's really so bizarre.
What, are they withdrawn it?
I don't know. It was something really useful for us. They are building a list of projects that tries to change the world.
Yeah.
That sounds like us. And I saw it on my iPhone and now I cannot find it. I don't understand if it's gone into archive or junk or whatever, but super odd.
It is.
I may have misread it, but I haven't been on any strong drugs today as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, I mean.
Right. Go back to the scenario. Hmm.
Oh, Bob is here. Hello, Bob.
Gone again.
Are you there, Bob?
Good morning.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Pretty good. I've been struggling with the compiler for the Crystal language, and I realize I absolutely hate static typing.
What do you do when you run out of languages to learn? Have you got any contingency plans?
Oh, then I started building my own languages from the ground up.
Okay, fair enough. Not a bad idea. So, yeah, Peter, I sent you the introduction a while ago, but I added a section, so there's a new version in the chat. I'm just wondering if there's consensus for talking about a scenario of working in VR to try to write it and make it, put really good ideas in there so it feels inspiring. And then the second half would be to show the issues if it's done in a closed environment. It may be something useful, but I'm just wondering what the feeling is.
Getting the draft now.
Wow, today is the anniversary of the first iMac.
And was that the first one without a floppy drive built in?
Oh, no, that was way before that.
Was it?
This is the, hang on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was. It would have been. Yeah, it was the colored ones, didn't it? It didn't have the came with the CD drive and no floppy.
Right in the translucent shells.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
No, those were not the days. I was not happy with that. It's like they decided to build toys. No, and also the aqua interface. Yes, I'm all about liquid, but come on, don't make my buttons look like they're droplets of water. That's a bit. Those were over commercialized.
Oh, we all got to play in Photoshop to try to fake the effect.
Doesn't.
But it also meant that when you walked into an office, you really instantly knew where you were. If you saw lots of color, then you knew you weren't in PC world, and this was probably a happy thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Oddly, my original 512K Macintosh will still boot, but my newer Macintoshes from the Apple II, the Mac II era, my 2CX, that generation don't boot anymore. It's very frustrating because I'd love to be able to get a copy of the ROMs on them so that I can run them in emulators. But of course, you have to be able to run the machine in order to run the program to copy the ROM out of it.
Is that because, is that sometimes, well, I can't remember what the component was called. You used to have basically a little battery on the motherboard that, you know, was,
Yeah.
Sometimes if that goes, but I guess one could possibly replace or bypass that component, you know, effectively.
I remember how to reset it though. What was it called, the ERAM or something? EPRAM?
Oh, go on to Apple discussions today, and there are still people. It's the Apple equivalent of have you turned it off and on again, and it's still alive and kicking in the Apple public forums. It's shocking, really.
So I don't know who is coming today, but we're 1/4 past. So what is the consensus for going through? And okay, I'll just tell you the rationale behind this little scenario. So Annie Murphy-Paul, who is going to be at the symposium and therefore in our book, she wrote the book, The Extended Mind. If you haven't already read it, I highly recommend
Reading it now.
Oh, wonderful. She's a bit of a journalist in the sense that, and I'm sure she may listen to this in the future, it's totally fine. Some of the sections are a bit journalistic, A, B, C, D. I did some research, here's what I found. But many of them are really deep and connected. So the point is we think outside our brain, not just in our brain. There's a section of thinking in the environment, in the built environment, in the natural environment. There's also thinking with others towards the end of the book. And thinking with others is, of course, what Doug Engelbart was on about, collective intelligence. That's the key thing. So a very specific example she gives relates very much to discussions we've had in this community on and off for a long time. And that is, if you have a meeting, a normal meeting in an organization, very often people hate it because 1 or 2 people will speak most of the time. Maybe they are higher rank people in whatever capacity that may be. Maybe people who they feel less confident, maybe, as she says, women or minorities may not feel like speaking. Also, if the leader, manager, or facilitator gives their perspective first, that tends to slow down discussion because if people disagree, they may not want to say that. So what research has shown is that if a session starts with a facilitator, manager, leader, whatever, saying something like, here's the thing we have to deal with, it's pretty tough, what do you think? And then everybody in the environment write on an index card piece of paper, whatever it is, their perspective. 1 second. How's your tooth? Good boy. Anton had 2 teeth pulled out today. Not cool for an 8-year-old. Yeah, so if it's just a question and everybody has to write it down silently, then it's more likely that everybody will have a say because they're not going to compete with someone else speaking. And also they haven't heard the leader's opinion first, so they're not biased and wondering what they should or shouldn't write. So that half is really cool and useful. But then the second half of it is so interesting, and that is when you then share these knowledge products or knowledge objects or whatever you want to call them, they have to stay visible and available. And the more complicated they are, the better, which is an interesting issue. So the best way to do this, they say, is not with laptops, but it is by writing on paper and putting it on walls. And that's where murals come in, of course, as well. You don't just have these little note cards, you also have bigger illustrations and you work like that. But they have to be kept updated. And here's the final thing that I remember from this, which is if people write their own notes privately, it turns out that very often they end up singing off a different music sheet, to take a direct quotation from this. So the notes that you write should ideally be in the shared space as well. So quite clearly, this is an ideal situation for a virtual reality or augmented reality environment, right? You know, you write your things privately and then you can share it on the walls. The way they're shown can be modified, things can be enlarged, made smaller, all that great stuff. So I think one thing we can do in this community is, what? No, they said music sheets. I'm sure it's referring to sing from the same hymn sheet. Maybe they didn't want a religious connotation, but for some reason, they chose to say sing from the same music sheet. It was a bit odd.
No, I only mention it because I had to read it several times because this is this problem that I don't think particularly religious about it, and it's a well-known term from basically being of a similar output. But it's this problem that the moment you have to read something twice, you lose the flow of what's stated. So I would go with the old phrase, the more common phrase.
Yeah, but that isn't what they said.
Who's they?
In the book, The Extended Mind, she quotes researchers who studied what I talked about. And
I'll go and look it up. I suspect, but the other thing is often.
Mark, I read it an hour ago.
What, the book or the research that it came from? Okay.
Well,
in which case, sort of quote it, because then we can look it up. What I'm trying to say to you is that it's this thing about sense to the reader. It's am I writing for myself, or am I writing for the reader?
Mark, can we please not get sidetracked on what a researcher said that's been quoted? The researcher.
I'm just trying to stop you pushing away the point. And what I was trying to put across is that if we're writing for the ease of the reader, I would not put things in front of them that cause them to have to reread the thing twice to work out if it is what you meant it to mean. It's as simple as that. And it's not. I'm not. It's not an antithetical thing. It's just it. You know. It's sometimes we write things that don't actually when we reread them.
Mark, you're Mark. I have to say, this is a diversion from what Froda was saying. For the rest of us, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't, and I really would like to enable Froda to finish his thoughts on this, on the facilitation of meetings, because I understand. I don't have to read the chapter. I've been part of that movement for the last 25 years of how you run meetings. I've tried to do a little bit of that in this meeting from time to time to suggest that we stay on a topic and some things like that. So I'm doing that again at the moment.
Yeah, so this particular phrase, let's not get hung up on it. The point is that the research showed that when people could express their opinions in parallel, so it wasn't speaking. And then secondly, when the opinions were expressed and there were comments, that this was shared. This seems like an ideal situation for a virtual reality environment or an augmented reality environment. In this case, I don't think there's any functional difference. So I think it could be fun for us to write about that, hype that up, make it exciting, and then look at the issues of making this, because I'm sure Apple or Meta or Google or whoever with a couple of billion could make this incredibly compelling. But if we end up being in an environment where it is owned, just like Microsoft Word, the document format, that's really, really bad, of course. And of course, we know that in our community. But I don't think that a casual VR looking person would get that. So I think that's an important thing we can highlight. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Rhoda,
Yeah.
let me point out, this isn't a comment relative to your question, but one of the most significant things that's been happening at Stanford in the last 5 years, plus or minus, is the design school, the D school. I mention that simply because their methodology, which is kind of very much reflects IDEO and David Kelly, also talks about using Post-its on a board, which is almost directly analogous to what you're talking about in VR. So they're both going in the same direction, which means that there's a whole part of Silicon Valley which kind of is receptive to that approach, in my mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there are so many beautiful historical bits. Japanese version of it is called KJ Ho, which is basically everybody writes something, put it up on the walls. You start grouping it, and then you label it, and then you go from there. There is, of course, software available, web-based. There's Figma, I think, that's addressing this. I think, Mark, that Noda that you used in VR to an extent addresses the kind of the shared space.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can put things in a space, you know, and give it a shape. Actually, at the moment, it doesn't work quite so well with a textual note. So if you wanted something a bit like a post-it, it's probably not so good because it's really trying to work with shapes and links. But broadly, yes.
Yeah, so the work that it's worth actually, if you get the book, to actually read it back to front, read the last chapters first, because they're more relevant to our work. And I don't think it goes against anything that we have discussed in our community, but it's nice to have a bit of research in addition to what we've been doing. But I think that it will be fun for us to maybe prototype some of this if we can. Also fun just to write dreams about it. But it really comes down to the second half of it, which is how can it be open? Of course, I think part of it will be visual meta. Of course, I think part of it will be WebXR. But these are the things that us as a, whatever we want to call ourselves, community have to fight for. Because I love and adore Apple. I'm a complete Apple fanboy, but Apple exists to make the maximum amount of money. A lot of their products are absolutely ridiculous toys to make money. Google, they do things and they throw.
Wait. You're off on your rant again.
Thank you for
them.
stopping me, Bob. Entirely appropriate.
You know, what do you want to talk about? What are you introducing? Not Apple and all that stuff. What do you want us to talk about today?
Two things. One, can we together write down notes on how such a thing should be? Two, can we then afterwards go through, highlight the issues of implementing it so that it doesn't become owned only commercially by one company?
Ah, that sounds good.
So this conversation is
Oh.
recorded, as all of them are. So also, we had this idea of writing down time code for when we find something really interesting that we discussed primarily with Fabienne. So if somebody wants to, in the chat, if something is interesting, just write down, hang on, we can see somewhere how far we are into this thing, right? No, well, we can see on the clock. We can, you know, we know when it started. We're now 27 minutes in. So just write 27 minutes. Sorry, my wife's asking me a question. So, okay, I'm going to go around the table here then, and I'm going to start with Peter. Peter, is there any aspect of that kind of work that you think is worth highlighting? Let's pretend we're just doing a ton of bullet points.
I think we should address programmers as a representative community, also grad students, maybe housewives. Remember all the good old days with HyperCard when you were going to have your stack with your recipe systems and all in them, and all that sort of fell by the wayside.
Yep.
So we don't want to just capture the highly technical, but we also want to capture the ordinary average citizen and how they might be using that kind of a system too.
So imagine then we are now sitting around a table, a virtual table, and we have written down a few things on the issue. Okay, to help us clarify this, what should the actual issue be? Should it be how to run the symposium or how to change climate change, or should we have a real issue, or should we talk about the process? What do you think is best? Bob, I can see you have an opinion on this.
I have a pile of opinions, always, as always. One is that we've stopped. First of all, we changed the actual writing down of the idea that we want to contribute to imagining that we're writing down the idea that we want to contribute. And then what happened was Frode called on Peter, and Peter read his imagined writing thing down, and then Frode changed the topic again. At least it seemed to me, and that's when I kind of wrinkled my forehead. That's the process that I've just seen happening.
Well, I mean, the intention today is to discuss what would such a process be like, especially what would be unique in a virtual environment, and what would the issues be.
Well, it would, I've been a part of this kind of process for 20, 25 years. It's extremely common in certain parts of business. Every meeting, when people want to bring together a bunch of diffuse ideas, and then to cluster them, and then to begin to see what we want to focus on, happens every day in thousands, if not tens of thousands of situations. So, if we're going to imagine it, we're not doing it.
Yeah, that's fair
If
enough.
we're going to imagine it, we're not doing it. I'm going to repeat that for the benefit of the journal. All right.
So are you saying that we should do it now?
We don't have the tools for that.
Well, we could write separately and put it into the chat log. That could be one way, but that's, of course, only the first step.
And of course, that eliminates the visual element of having stickies, which you can move around and cluster very easily.
Yeah, but in terms of doing or talking about it, we're only 5 people today, so it's not, a very large group. Of course, it would work in a large group, but what I'm talking about is, what are the special affordances that can only be made possible in a virtual environment? I guess one of them would be saving layouts of these stickies, so that we get to one point and then we say, okay, lunchtime, we've saved it. And then after lunch, we keep working. And then in the evening or next week, we say, hang on, what was the difference between before and after lunch? That's an example of something that can't easily be done in an analog world, other than if you take a picture of it, but then you don't have.
It's done every day. You do it on big pieces of paper. You take the big pieces of paper, put them on another wall. The groups go over there. They move around the clusters. They draw certain circles around them. For this cluster, they name the cluster. They say, no, we're not going to do this. Let's start on another one, and we get another set of stickies with different colors. This has all been done. They're in Europe. It's actually been done even more in Europe, because there are, when I went there 10 years ago, there were little plastic tables that had different shapes of post-it notes.
Bob, hang on. I know it's been done. A section of my PhD thesis is on this. I'm fully aware it's been done. We all know it's been done, that it is being done. My question to the group is, what is it in a digitally virtual environment that can bring this further, that you cannot easily do with pen and paper? Because if you change the layouts, then you can't easily go back and say, hang on, what was the layout 2 hours ago? Unless someone took a picture and all of that, right? So what is the unique attributes that virtual reality might bring to this, if any?
It depends on the purpose of the meeting, in my view. And the purpose of the meeting is to move the often, at least in the use of the sticky environment, is to move the group to some sort of consensus as to topic and to arrangement as to what we're going to do next, which is a different process, and which more detail is done and so forth. It isn't simply creating something that then becomes text, and then becomes firm and decisive for all time and so forth. It's part of a moving of a group process along toward different kinds of decision making. This has been, at least my experience, in the most successful part of elements of this.
Yeah. So Brandel, the last chapter of our beloved book is all about thinking in groups. And I've just been talking to the group about two specific things in here. I'll make it brief for you since you have read it. Number one, instead of people in a meeting, everybody just talking, meaning somebody talks a lot, somebody talks little. One of the techniques to open up things is everybody writes something on an index card or equivalent about the issue at hand. So everybody gets a say. Second half, when that is shared, that these knowledge artifacts remain visible and shared, and that any further commentary is done onto them in a visible way, not privately, to make sure that we're all on the same page. So this is something that is great when pen and paper, when everybody can be in a large meeting room. So we're asking now two questions. One, what affordances can we have in a virtual environment? Something we've talked about in this group on and off many times. And two, what are the issues with building it for us as a community? So for instance, Apple or Meta, they can all build wonderful versions of this, but how can it be built in an open way so you can use somebody's environment and then go to someone else's environment? So the, you know, potential issue, those two things. That's where we are. And Bob is now talking through some of the issues around doing it for real with his experience. It's in, yeah, it's in the, I'm just looking at the book here. It's in the chapter Thinking with Groups. It's a really good chapter. There's a great phrase, the mind is just less and less in the head. Andy Clark. He's British, isn't he, Mark?
Yes. he is.
Clark, yeah. Yeah, no, a bunch of really good videos from Clark. But yeah, I take Bob's point that an organization is an entity that does more than just produce objects. It produces objects related to its discussions. It's a thing that makes decisions, and as such, yeah, like those actions and the way that its behaviors are structured to bring about those actions with decisiveness is a field of study that goes well with distributed cognition, actually, but is sort of its own thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what we're talking about. And the reason I'm asking for your help, I sent you the draft of the introduction to the book, which is intended to be a bit of a statement also to the new authors of the book, where all I'm trying to say is VR is going to happen. It's going to become normal, and it gives us an opportunity to wake up our imagination and think again, because it's been dormant for so long because everybody thinks they know what text is. And finally, the innovations that we need to make text amazing in VR will also benefit text in traditional medium. That's the entire introduction. But it seems that some people get VR instantly. Many others just don't see the point of text in VR. That's why doing a basic scenario where we say, you walk into a room, you have the cards, you do this stuff, it's amazing, you know, to really help them understand, and then say, by the way, here are the issues. That's really what might be useful for us.
To take forward Bob's sort of question about, well, you know, what are we trying to do? Two things occur to me in this is, so what is it that virtual reality actually adds to this? Because I confess, he said that this technique, gosh, I can remember doing it almost since I left school. It crops up. It's interesting. I see it having more traction in dysfunctional groups because it, you know, so it gives the most in groups that don't actually communicate well. Often groups communicate well actually already doing this. And the other thing I noticed that might be pertinent to the VR side is that, and I saw this was really true when I was working up in government a few years back, is that often all that creative shared thought dies at the end of the meeting, even if the sort of the thing with all the stickies on is moved somewhere else. That somewhere else, even if it's in a canteen or it's in the wall they will walk past or something. But I was quite surprised at actually how quickly it just faded away. And it was interesting how little used it was, even by the people who were most invested in calling the meeting. I don't claim to have answers there. These are just observations that surprised me at the time. So it's really good for listing stuff. It's certainly good for flattening structures and getting away from issues of hierarchy. It does occur to me, I've got a couple of things in the sidebar. It does occur to me that one thing that doing this in a digital environment or the virtual environment allows for is that we can be more flexible. So if the one comment, the one note needs to sort of be in 2 places on the wall, it can more easily be, rather than you have to copy the same thing onto another physical post-it and put that there, in the same way that we can generate or suppose links in the loosest sense of the word between parts of the stickies, the diagram, whatever, that don't need to enforce structure, but may suggest cross connections. Again, because if you did it on a wall, you'd start drawing lines, and lines have often more salience than we want. You know, we use them casually without realizing often what comes with them as baggage. So maybe again, that's where using this technique in a virtual environment helps. But the only question I'm in fact left asking is whether this is this really the biggest thing that we want to do in work for VR and AR? I'm not sure I'm totally on board on that.
What do you think, Mark, would be a better scenario case to help people understand how different we are with the potential benefits? I'm very happy to look at something else. All I'm trying to do is find a scenario, say, this is uniquely brilliant in VR. Here are some issues.
Yeah, well, it probably alludes to the last. It's more this ability to deconstruct things in a way that you just can't do with pencil and paper unless you have a very agile mind, and in which case you're actually you're not using the paper, you're using the paper as a prompt to what's going on in here. And of course, sharing what's in here is harder, you know, if you're trying to share it with somebody else in the room, which gets us back to what these techniques are doing. But what I'm alluding to is it's not the technique as such that is of interest, it's what we can do with what comes out of such techniques, our ability to be more flexible with the insights we have. Because as Bob's rightly said, we've been doing this sort of post-it thing and its various guises and names for actually quite a long time, and very effectively too.
Mark, that sounds like a very interesting commentary, but in terms of a scenario, I mean, the idea here is simply the people who are coming to this future of text to present. It's absolutely astounding. I put in a link to the website, so you should all feel free to have a look at who's going to be there. Some really incredible people in this space, which is hard to get. So in order to open up this to a wider community, I really think, like in Doug 62 paper, we need a Joe almost. You know, we need a little bit of a walkthrough to really paint it very, very clear. And I think we agree that working together has to be one of the issues, because one of the concerns about VR is that it's isolating. You know, you put this on and you're away from the rest of the world, which of course can happen, but we don't think it has to happen. So how can VR augment collective intelligence work? That's what we're asking, right? And it doesn't have to be the whole package. We're not going to today solve all the problems in the world with this. It's just to make it exciting for someone.
Yeah. Well, so in the post-it note example, one of the critical sort of features of the text input, if you will, is that it needs to be effortless and fast. One of the practical consequences of that is that the text needs to remain at the same size. For example, you can't make a post-it note that's 3 feet across and make it with the same sort of form and ease that you make the smaller ones. You can technically do it. You can print it out. You can put glue on it, but the sort of the cadence of all of those actions and the manner in which they need to represent an intentionality are completely different. Virtual reality, you can write something with the same ease and you can simply grow it. You know, so there's an obvious immediate benefit, and so that means that you have the ability to render a set of relationships or hierarchy much more thinkable as a consequence of that. I mean, another thing that is, I think, very important, and I'm thrilled. I didn't know you got Jim Holland, but thank you. I think probably it was from my mentioning, unless you know him otherwise. Cool track of work he's got.
He's super enthusiastic. It's just so touching.
I'm sure he seems lovely from the few sort of pieces of media that I've gotten from him. But you know, his big thing is context restoration, similar to Bill Buxton. well, Buxton has some ways in which the restoration is important, and so you can play back the room, you know, and that's because a lot of the time the sense making is accretive in the context of that, and sort of similar to if you watch a small child, you know, Edgar draw a picture, a lot of the time the sense that a line makes at a certain point is obscured by additional stuff that's layered into it. So you'll find that a small child's drawing is like eventually a massive scribble that looks like a ruined object, you know. But in fact, like it's the way that they applied an accretive meaning to it, where they've put more and more and more over it. And if that's renderable in a replayable form, so in that sense, you know, a room that has been used with sticky notes and somebody having videotaped every angle of the room can stand in for virtual reality. But like at some point, you got to say, no, this is what the virtual reality is doing. So I think, so the context restoration, the replayability, the flexibility of representation, so that because you can encode that if this is a green sticky note rather than a red sticky note, then it's 3 times as important or whatever. But yeah, having the ability to actually change those visual, tangible representations in situ with a cadence and a speed that allow you to negotiate over those things, because then you might go like, oh, actually maybe that's not meaningful, and you scale it down. And if you think about the commitment, the sort of the social and cognitive commitment that is required to then re-minimize something that you've gone to the physical labor and effort of making big, it takes a special kind of conviction to do that, which isn't necessary within a VR environment. So I think that like the cheapness of the artifacts is an essential component of, is I guess all I've been saying this whole time.
Boom. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, another thing I think we should touch on is the importance of having the VR environment be scriptable. And
I didn't hear that. You scratched out. Be what?
Notion of having it scriptable. It shouldn't just be people directly interacting with the environment. We also have to be able to have software manipulation of the environment to do things that would be too time consuming for a person to be doing by hand. I'm dropping 2 links in the sidebar. One is for a description of some abstraction ideas from the interactive version of the SICP textbook. And second is a link to the specific section showing the creation of a graphical language based upon Escher's drawings. And that will give you an idea of how we link the visual to the programmatic.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important. And I think that goes to metadata, as you know, things have to be
When I was saying
knowable of
scriptable
what they are.
environment, not decryptable.
Just correct me in chat.
Okay.
Scriptable. Oh, okay. That makes more sense, but decryptable is more cryptic.
Although actually I might want to riff on that idea.
Yeah, I mean, now we're getting somewhere really interesting. Like I could imagine, depending on the kind of meeting, let's say we're talking about wildlife. I have a model of a bird. I can put that on my index card. And that model has all the physiological information about that bird, all the metadata, everything from Wikidata, Wikipedia, whatever it is. And so that little bird as an image can be moved everywhere. But as we've talked about before, if we want to, we throw it onto a map. We'll see where the bird's habitat is or whatever. So to have this be an intelligent environment beyond just plain text. Yes, thank you, Peter.
And I just dropped in a link to an O'Reilly discussion of scriptability, recordability, and attachability from the AppleScript world, which were absolutely wonderful ideas that sort of fell by the wayside a couple overhauls of the Mac OS ago. But if we could bring those concepts forward into VR, I think it'd be invaluable.
Are you imagining that all this would, or some of this would be built by someone before September 27th?
No, What I'm imagining is
Oh,
purely that
What's
we
the-
write it as a scenario. We write it as a story.
oh,
If any of this is something that somebody can build, because I would love to have someone put on a headset and get a feel for it, even if they can't do much. Maybe they can do just one thing, but to be in a room where you have just, and one of the things that is so wonderful, there are many things wonderful, but one of the things that are specifically wonderful about you being here, Bob, is that your work with murals to me just brings me out of this size thinking, right? So if you have a huge array of stickies, so to speak, virtual stickies, there's no reason why you shouldn't draw a frame around it and collapse it and say, this is now a mural. It's a record of this meeting, and then you could make that as small as a sticky, move it up. Because one of the interesting principles that Annie talks about towards the end of the book is that more complicated knowledge shapes are actually better for groups because there's more to point to. So rather than simplifying, which was
mhm.
to me, a surprise. So,
Well-
even I managed to build a room for the Linnaean pitch that we did, where all you had was these cards and you can make them big and small, and that was it. It may be worth us writing a story here and then building one room. I mean, Brandel has rendered some beautiful static rooms in VR. So maybe we could work together on, you read this thing and then it says, now that you got to this point, click here if you're on a VR headset to see what this would look like at this stage of the process.
Well, the most diverse and multi-sided group of murals that I have is on climate change and sustainability. You can see, if you look at, I think it's chapter 4 in my little book of messes and wicked problems, a whole bunch of them are there, but they're not all that I have done. They're all out of date. That is, I did them in 2010 to the period 2010 to 2015, often under commission from the European Union, from the World Business Council, and so forth. So they're not nothing. They're not just imaginary things that somebody might use. No, they were things that quite a few million euros were paid for. Not all to me, but to the people who were creating the ideas as well. So they have some substance, even some interesting substance in the real world, in the sense that, oh, if those are the best things that we have of looking at the whole complex of this together, and it's and they are not, they don't incorporate all the stuff that the IPCC presents. These are mostly done things on policy and aims for different ways that policymakers could use them. So there are 10, 12, 15 of those, which could be put in some sort of a virtual reality room, and you can look at them, because you can download that from my website, and I can send to the others if you want.
Yeah, I think, we have one already, and Mark has worked for some of the metadata for that. My concern, though, is twofold. One is that these are fully created knowledge objects. It doesn't capture the process of building one in a collective environment, which I think could be helpful. And also,
yes, well, all right. So I 2 meetings ago or 3 meetings ago, I offered to begin to create that for this group, and that was generally rejected.
No.
So,
right.
So I'm confused as to what it is really that you're after.
Okay, what I'm after is very simple. What I'm after is a scenario where someone puts on a headset in a group, work is done, and that's it. But it is really trying to capture, when I was working in advertising in the 90s, we did a lot of printouts and putting on the wall, which is not the same as what you're talking about, Bob, but that freedom of having a room, walking around, comparing things is great. So I have a love for that. I understand that. But it's so bizarre. Two things. Well, there are many things that are bizarre. I mean, to use the climate change mural, believe it or not, climate change is still controversial. Even here, having a drought in England, I saw that the American government just passed the biggest climate bill ever, but not a single Republican voted for it.
You don't
Right.
want to do it because of climate change. You can just
No,
say that.
no,
We
no,
can
no,
go
no.
on.
I'm saying that that's just one weird issue, but I think we should look at making at looking at someone creating something rather than interacting with something that exists.
Okay.
So, but I'm not talking about
I
making.
mean, I don't know. What do the rest of you think?
So personally, I wasn't aware that you hadn't that you felt that suggestion was rejected. I'm not sure what you would ask of me to work on such a thing, but I think it sounds like a very interesting case study and independently useful thing to have kind of your output and focus on. So to whatever extent that it's necessary for me to be able to support, I'd be interested and willing to probably do it, but definitely at least hear about it and talk about it. As you're probably aware, like I have a new job, and so that it means that what I can do and the manner in which I probably should limit my contributions is something that's a little bit up in the air. But yeah, no, I think that sounds really interesting. I mean, what it seems like Frode is talking about though is that we want to have an imagined process scenario. So simply somebody doing that work is not, while not unwelcome, is not the same as the idea of the process story that needs to be kind of enunciated for the benefit of being able to pull people into the idea of text-based productivity in VR. And so I do see those things as independently important and valuable. Hope that makes sense.
Good. Thank you. The question is, are you imagining, this is to Frode, are you imagining this scenario being only written in text?
No,
or would it have pictures in it?
I'm imagining the specific thing that I asked about today is for a section in the introduction to the book. And for that section to simply do two things.
Gee, I thought you were talking about the meeting, and now we're talking, yeah, all right. Okay, so the book.
Yeah, so the idea is I have written an introduction that I have shared with you guys where there is a certain emotional message. This can be great, but there are issues. That's basically the message. A lot of people don't seem to feel that text and VR makes any sense, which is, to my mind, quite bizarre. And I'm not saying that a VR environment should be only text. Of course not. Text is one of the medium that can help tie things together. So what I thought would be great, because I have written a thing, but that's just my perspective. We are a community. If you guys feel like it, if we could together with some bullet points come up with a scenario of, something along the line of, dear reader, you put on your headset and you go into a meeting where you are with other people and you can start doing this and this. And then the power of us and the group try to write down what can be done that cannot be done physically or on a traditional digital display, just to really wake people up to the potential of VR.
And is that a written description or partially an actually showing them how it would be different?
I think it would be primarily written, maybe illustrations if we can get them done to a good quality that fits in the scope. If we can build one or two or three, or maybe just one virtual environment, so we can have that link that says, at this point, put on your headset and you can see what it would look like. So we could, fake it, put up some stickies on the wall here and do this and that. they take it off, keep reading, and then say, okay, because to build something interactive is really difficult and expensive. Of course, it's important. But the thing about VR is you kind of got to be there. To have screenshots from VR always looks a bit stupid. You know, it doesn't really get the message. So if we build it using WebXR, it'll work in whatever browser, whatever headsets one uses. So considering it's a symposium on text and VR and with AI, it's not a big ask. You know, and yeah.
Well, then the question becomes: do the people in this at this meeting have the time and effort to do that, or do we want, you know, or is it simply we're going to do it the rest of this period? By the way, it's already you know, I have to leave it in about 14 minutes, so which I have to do each time. For most of the time. So is that, you know, there is a brainstorming thing where people just throw out a bunch of ideas. You know, you can capture them in whatever way you want to. We don't get to see what other people are contributing, and that's one of the visual things that
Bob,
the sticky notes.
Bob, sorry, I'm interrupting in the same polite way as you
Yeah.
interrupted me earlier.
Sure,
Respectfully.
go ahead.
Instead of talking about whether we should talk about it, do you have an alternative you'd like to talk about?
No, I'm
Okay.
happy to, you know, to contribute to whatever it is, but it's always gets a little hard to do that sometimes for me. So let's do it.
Right, okay, so I see Mark has his hand up and he's muted.
Sorry, next door's dogs were barking. I apologize. On a practical note, so where I think this all connects up is that, so we, you know, established from Bob's observation earlier on, this sort of project decomposition amongst people there's nothing new in that. So that's not the new thing we're describing. And to a certain extent, if we just start with a description of that, I think a lot of people say, well, yeah, so what? I think the interesting thing is there are two things we could say. In the process of doing that task, i.e. the capturing the ideas that normally be maybe writing literally with your hand, writing something onto a piece of paper, is there something enriching or more innovative that using a VR device, whether everyone's using one or some people, you know, changes it? That's one aspect. And then having got to the point where the cards, as it, for want of a better term, have been written, what more can this new medium let us do with the collective knowledge that we can't do if we just have to stick them on a wall somewhere? And I think those are two things where we arguably can show there's some improvement. Otherwise, you're just making sticky notes in VR, which is okay, but not going to set the world on fire.
Yeah. So I mean, I do think that the sticky notes that you can change the size of and that you can replay the sort of the production of is a singularly important idea that really could set the world on fire if it's presented in the right way. But I agree that it would be really valuable to have more. Have I shown you? So sorry, this is maybe seems like a bit of a tangent, but have I shown you this super kind of dumb game that I made maybe 10 years ago called Life, where you play sort of finger puppet games where you got to like brush a guy's teeth and things like that? Does that ring a bell? Anybody seen that?
No.
Oh, it's awesome. Okay, so it's this YouTube video here. Maybe Frodo, if you want to share your screen, you should probably mute it. But so it's a video game. There's this app. There was this hardware input. Or maybe yeah, thanks. So there's this hardware input where you hold your fingers above a sort of a USB stick sized thing, and you have the ability to move your fingers around. And so this is somebody who's trying to brush their teeth, and and it's quite janky. So you got to get the toothpaste onto the toothbrush, and then you need to sort of wiggle your fingers around. And if you skip forward a little bit, then the next level is you've got to move your fingers up and down and in and out in space in order to control the pose of a woman who's trying to get a passport photo taken. And it's yeah, there she goes. And it's a very strange and difficult thing in terms of the piloting of this multi-dimensional thing where you have all of these different finger points and they control her eyebrows, but you can actually make her basically speak and smile and other things once you know the sort of the piloting rules for these things. And yeah, the rest of the game is much like that. But what I think is interesting about it is the way in which you can use your fingers to code for things. You can control the positions of stuff. And one of the things that I intend to do, I was talking to my friend about what to do in WebXR, I can build that again in WebXR, but this time it can be in 3D. So I was thinking of doing like Michael Flatley, Lord of the Dance, but where you're using a full-size person out there, or possibly a hilariously shaped full-size person hand with boots on, and then doing this and making it out in front of you, so that you have a person and you have to do that, and that hand is your hand but big and out there and possibly sort of scaled and shaped to look like a person. It's a stretch, but like what I think that it's sort of pointing to for me in a discursive environment is the dynamic and interactive performance of art objects for the creation of artifacts that can represent relevant sort of things for the purposes of discussion, that you can pose and you can create things. So, having the ability to create a perfect human figure, and like there's a guy in Shopify who has this really great marionette study again, where like you imagine a figurine that you have in space. It's silly. You have a figurine in space, and as though they're being pushed through an infinitely dense medium, so that you just sort of poke at their leg and it bends up, but then it remains there in place. So you have the ability to construct and pose figures and objects and joints and things in a way that means that instead of talking about a person, it's pretty trivial to compose a person in a pose and other things like that at the same time. So, in the same way that you have to maybe have textual labels as stand-ins for ideas, being able to conjure and configure those visual artifacts relating to those ideas, I think is really interesting and relevant. But also just that multi-dimensional control, I think is really valuable and interesting in a way that I don't fully yet understand.
I think that is super interesting and valuable, but it almost goes against the theme of the day. Because it's so, in a nice way and in a provocative way, because, in trying to sell someone on the glamour of VR, of working you're introducing really important complexity. I mean, one of the things Vint Cerf was discussing with me after reading the paper introduction was that typing will be difficult in VR. And I had to explain, I was happy to be able to explain to him that you can actually use a normal keyboard. So to be able to have lots of
Yeah, you can also speak. And actually iOS 16 showed a stab at punctuating dictation in a way that hasn't currently.
But to be able to have different physical devices to help you do things in that space, I can imagine the next version of the Apple Pencil, for instance, will be a magical wand, which will have more feeling to it than the controller. So you would have different tools for different things. So when you're talking about the complexities there, it's a fantastically interesting topic. But in terms of just help me get this glamorous stuff written, share this with someone, say, oh, damn, this would be amazing. And then, oops, these are the issues. We need a few more bullet points, people.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been really, really thrilled with as a concept is, like on Apple platforms, there is the Memoji, this idea that you can have an emoji that is your face. And there are abilities to be able to kind of record small sequences where you're actually speaking and it's emoting in the way that your face is going. But there's also the pre-built like your face but mind blown, your face but swing with the stuff on top of it, your face but like doing a thank you, that kind of pretty cool. I think that those are also, I'm really optimistic that those could form a more sort of exactly. Yeah, it does. I think that the idea of linking text back to performance and to speakers is really interesting, and so that having the ability to effortlessly produce those facial poses and being able to interpose those with textual content could be a really significant and valuable innovation as well. So, you know, one of the things that I would really love to do is be able to, on a text message, capture my face here and then put it there, so that I don't have to pick the Memoji, but I also don't need to do an animated sequence. I maybe, one of the things that I personally do as well is a lot of the time when I'm textually communicating in a chat channel, my face emotes as though I'm actually undertaking the process of saying those things, and I'm estimating the intonation that I would use in order to think about the cadence that kind of thing would follow. And I feel like there's scope for those kinds of things to feature. And so again, these are the sorts of things where like text is sort of this, the boundary of what's text is being stretched a little bit, but I'm comfortable with it in the sense that, like, if it's creatable and it can be used in sort of in the broader context of a sort of a textual exchange, then I think that it qualifies.
I think that's super important. The thing that I'm writing in the introduction is we should allow this opportunity of thinking about VR to help us return to first principles of what is communication, what is thinking, and not be stuck in the past. There's this, you're highlighting something really important here. I just put in the notes. This sentence, I didn't say we should kill him. There's a beautiful little TikTok that says, it's a great sentence because if you emphasize any word, it changes the entire meaning. I didn't say we should kill him. I didn't say we should kill him, etc. So what was discussed earlier about recording and being able to play back then becomes crucial to that. You know, how was that meant? Yeah, that's absolutely an aspect of, there is the cold moving the post-it around, and then there is the warm human behind it. One of the great points that Annie's earlier chapter talks about is if students read science and it's plutonium does this and that, and it's kind of dry and factual, they don't remember it. But if it has Marie Curie and her husband moved to Paris and did this, and then they fell over, and, you know, if it's a human story, they remember it more. So that the way it's been rephrased, which I think is wonderful, is it isn't that this second type of story adds fluff. It is that the first one has been scrubbed of human value or something similar. So the way of being able to move back into an image or to a person, yes. Yeah, we lost Bob.
No, I think Bob just went.
Yeah, no, he waved. So yeah, lost in the sense of he had to go. We know that.
A quick thought. Because I was really interested in the ideas that Brandel was mentioning. I'm just wondering, sort of circle around to the text element of future text. So what would be a good example of where that sort of input that you're describing would replace a textual input? Because that's one of the enhancements, arguably, we might show in the sort of...
I was writing a note. Can you please repeat that?
Yeah, sorry, which is to say that, so all these ideas of using hands, or the 6 degrees of freedom to create, you know, rich gestures and create images and things. So I'm just thinking of a sort of an example, such as you might write in your scenario, where instead of writing, you know, we should have, I don't know, casual Fridays, that you would write something that would not be text, that would do not that particular text, but something otherwise today that you would write as text, but do it better and more usefully. I don't claim to know the answer, and I'm not in asking the question. This isn't a deliberate sort of, I don't think it works. I'm sure there is an answer. So maybe that's one to pose for ourselves, is to just bridge that gap, because I think that is quite a powerful thing, and that helps drags people out of the sense of, oh, right, so I'm now just writing virtual text in a virtual environment.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, well, yes, you are, but you're doing more than that. You're not doing that, but it's stuff you couldn't do before.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll run with that. So if you have a subject matter where the human form is particularly relevant, say you're blocking out choreography, then it's obviously necessary to capture aspects of subtleties of the human form. And so what people are doing in a room where they're sort of moving their bodies and things is an essential component of that. And so it may be the case that you simply record that video, a video of people doing that. But then you have the question of vantage point. You have the question of what is actually concluded, what are the relationships between those things. And so, we do have written forms for people describing things like dance and choreography, but they capture only a small sliver of what it is, and they require a great deal of sort of training, essentially, and mutual awareness of what specific sort of notation systems entail. Same for music, and one of the really awesome rabbit holes to be able to go down on the internet is to see alternative to Western musical notation systems, and seeing like Tibetan musical notation is just phenomenal because it's very visually descriptive, despite us having no ability to be able to kind of parse immediately what it is. You can just see it dripping with latent meaning of a kind that we're not accustomed to by seeing our treble clefs and our 4/4 time signatures. And yeah, so like I think one of the first things to do in the context of this is to go like, what are we writing, and why is it important to capture certain artifacts and have them as posables and configurables within this broader context. And so yeah, I think a meeting about bodies is interesting in that you would have to spend a lot of your time talking about it. If you're doing a meeting about martial arts, then there's going to be a lot about bodies that has to be captured, and you may need shorthands and they may be effective, but I feel like we could do better here.
And equally the opposite of being able to hide your body.
Yeah, and to be able to pare away, I mean, that's another aspect of like, if you're requiring a body in the form of a video, you don't have the ability to sort of, other than sort of having people say like, forget about what's happening with my face, I don't really have a face or whatever. Like, you don't have the ability to withhold detail unless you're responsible for the entire creation of an artifact. And that's one of the things that, Bill Buxton does a really great job of in sketching user experiences. This guy here is to say that sketching itself is an imperative discipline to follow. The context of user experience and understanding what it is that our relationship with technology is, because you need to have that flexibility. And so virtual reality and a fully augmented but discursive environment allows you to sketch conversationally with whatever tools that you have. And Buxton has a good video in 2010 or so, sort of shortly after the release of this book, where he does that thing that small children do and screws up a map by drawing all over it. But because he's narrated his annotations, and I believe he did it on a medium. This is sort of just as a sort of conversational piece, but he did it on a medium where the creative process of laying those marks onto the document can be captured. Then it means it's, rather than being an illegible mess, it's actually vastly more meaningful for somebody to be able to see this map as stuff gets drawn onto it. And what he's saying about, okay, so you go here, don't go that way because there's going to be construction on that road for a while, and so that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think one, considering deeply what are the sort of tangible and central artifacts to a specific sort of domain of discussion is an important focusing thing. But two, like you said, Frode, that a lot of the time when we sort of rely on stand-ins within something like, say, people, that we don't have the ability to configure and tune the level of detail when we're physically using ourselves and other things like that we would have the ability to do in a fully digital augmented environment. that we can use.
Yeah, so I have a question coming up to 20 past, 1 hour and 20 past. How about we, for a second, think about what Brandel, Fabian, and I could build in VR for this, so that we do one part of this process each. Like maybe one of us just has an almost empty room, because Brandel, you have the skills to make that incredibly well rendered. Maybe I do a more interactive room that's a bit more toyish, but different rooms that are reasonable within our time and interest level. But of course, we have to. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm saying that if we talk about a basic scenario, maybe we just spend the week having it in the back of our brains, talk about it again on Friday. But so, have we agreed that we're just gonna, because I haven't even asked, that we're gonna take Annie's scenario of people in a room with index cards? That's how we start. That's reasonable, right? You know, there is a problem to be solved. There's people in a room with index cards, and then a facilitator or whatever will take these and slap it on the wall. Of course, in VR, that'll be done automatically. So that in itself, just a wall with cards like you would have in a, we keep talking about a murder wall, could be nice. And then maybe we could even cheat and have done in 2D, you know, these things moving about, and just play it as a video on a wall. So it looks like they're moving about.
Because this sort of echoes the conversation we had when I think it was Brandel kindly first put one of Bob's murals into VR, and the immediate conversation, right? Then immediately struck off, well, if we could move this around here, or we could interact with that. I mean, I think the idea of the starting point, you can almost take the whole process for given. It's just not new enough to be exciting. You can expect people to understand that process. You say you could step in at the point and say, okay, so we've collected these index cards, which is normally the point you get to. Post-its, call them what you want, they can be different colors, whatever, but effectively you've got some kind of facsimile paper. And then the interesting part you can do, so, well, wait a minute, imagine instead of being this note with this bit of text on it, or effectively, you know, this artifact with this bit of text on, it was actually that the idea enshrined in that note was actually done this way, and then, you know, allowing us to show the extra affordances that one might take from it, because I think that's the thing that'll excite or inform people. Because you know, otherwise, all too easily, what you imagine is, instead of real post-its on a wall, you imagine digital post-its on a digital wall, and that it, in a sense, unintentionally undersells where we're at. So the exciting part is not having the digital wall or the rooms.
No.
It's the interaction. It's the interaction with the cards. So the substrate is almost at this point wasted effort, because you know, it's what the wall looks like or how far away. It's more the fact that whereas now we are stuck with using effectively some kind of bit of paper or something, on which probably in most cases we're writing manually, there are other things that we can do. And you know, just the really nice example Brad has given, that, you know, in some instances we can have a much richer and more informative input for others, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. That is the point of the written piece. So if you do want to put that in an email or something in a fuller form, I would absolutely love that. As a separate thing, I think we need to have 3 VR experiences. The first one, I think, will be just post-its on a wall, lacking that interaction, because the first thing we want to convey to these people is, wow, you have a huge wall, this looks amazing. And then the second one, I don't know how we're going to do it, because making interactions possible in VR is the most expensive and difficult bit, but try to find a way to show exactly what you said. You know, maybe it's a frozen moment where something is moving and it's clearly illustrated why it's moving. We have to write it out, no question.
Yeah, I sense we can
building it is really, really hard. Now, hang on. And then the third one maybe would be the final knowledge product, which of course will be refined in the real world, but there would be some clear structure, and you could see, oh my God, this looks like someone's actually worked in this room. And it could be made by 3 entirely different sets of things.
The latter, I think, is actually extremely strong, because I go back to my observation of watching people using this sort of type of, you know, spitballing technique for real, with paper is the thing dies literally the moment that people leave the room in most cases. I can see it working if you're a software design team and you're on this floor plate and you walk, you have a close interaction. But generally, if you've got, divisions north, south, east, and west together in a room, you've locked them in there for the day, you've made them interact with one another and write down all their ideas, which they duly do, and you've got those. Then what normally happens is someone takes a picture of that, then takes all the sticky bits down and perhaps even labels and numbers and puts them in a box, and that's the last they're ever seen of again. There's no information capture. So a really important part also is the fact that by doing this in the digital domain, it's stored portably on one level. So that's an immediate up. It's not the reason for doing it, but that's an immediate benefit. But more importantly,
it's
the
important.
ability to abstract out from it into a form of information that you can then use practically whether in VR or elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandel, what do you think about these 3 rooms? Make sense?
They sound like they will make sense. They don't totally make sense to me in terms of like, I wouldn't be able to jump in and start building something at this moment. In terms of what we saw, it seems like we're envisioning. But I think I'm following the process, if that makes sense. Have people seen like Brett Victor's The Humane Representation of Thought and videos like that? He's talking mostly about sort of individual or small groups who are exploring sort of tangible media, tangible objects like robots and other things like that, rather than thinking about the actual discussion as being the primary thing that's being desirable to support. But I feel like some of the images that he has of what eventually becomes dynamic land are valuable to play with. I mean, as I've said before, like I dispute his area of emphasis, and I think it's to do with his particular interest as an electrical engineer, rather than necessarily being adequately, frankly, interested in human beings and the ideas that they're throwing around with each other. But I think that it's a pretty good starting point in terms of what he's constructing and viewing. Jim, if you're not familiar, that's this video sort of channel here, Worry Dream. Brett Victor's videos about augmented spaces for the purpose of making sense of things, and he had a number of places where he was sort of imagining non-immersive but digital media for the manipulation of those things, the sort of the custom content authoring and things like that.
What is his name again?
His name is Brett Victor. I put it in the chat, so there's a link in the chat here for it's a Worry Dream. So his website is worrydream.com, and then his videos are at vimeo.com/worrydream.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting anchor for a lot of the discussion that's happened within sort of the community that Fabian and I circulated over the last 10 years, 8 years in some of these videos, because they're a really great sort of guiding point of what a fully immersive computer would be. The idea is that dynamic land, it was sort of a lab that he built up in Oakland, where you were in a computer essentially, and you could walk around and make use of any surface as a space to put programs on to be able to kind of make sense of things. But yeah, I never visited, so I'm not sure how that went, but it struck me that some of the concessions that were made for the benefit of making the system computer readable were not in line with what I wanted to maintain a space as being human readable, and that would be my preference in terms of the use and deployment of things like virtual reality or projective camera systems. But yeah, really set the stage for what certainly Humane Technology are doing up in San Francisco and other people in kind of related environments.
Yeah, I mean,
seeing spaces particularly.
as far as I'm concerned, my definition of VR starts with you put in a thingy and you're somewhere else. at some point that will mean physical sensation, smells, temperature, the whole thing. Subsets of that is everything else. So one of the amazing things about what is happening with VR is exactly what you said. I think that, hang on, I'm just going to write a note to myself, 130, same info, environments. So for instance, we have this amazing meeting room. We do the stuff we talked about earlier. And then, like we talked about last time, if you're on a train or an airplane, you should have access to all those knowledge artifacts, but presented in a travel mode. When you come home, you will have said the office wall that is this at home is actually this wall, because that's my preference. So you don't have to set everything up again. That's going to be amazing. And if you then take your headset off, of course, some of it will be on your laptop, some of it will be on your watch. And I do think projectors will become massively important, because you will dedicate some spaces on your walls, whether it's a cheap paint on screen or projector. I don't think we care, but they will be persistently there. Yes, absolutely. It is slightly deep though. But in terms of one of the things you made, Brandel, was a library, right? Many months ago. And had a pre-baked lighting, so it was beautiful. Could you?
Of Linnaean Society, the library there, or?
Well, it was beautiful like that. I don't think it was an exact copy.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking about is if you could easily, and in collaboration with us, I'll do whatever assets I can, do the first scene where all we have is a beautiful space, post-its and groups all over the place, just that. Then I think we can experiment with the second step using spokes and hubs and all of that stuff. It can look a lot uglier, but you can interact a little bit more with it.
Yeah, I mean, if we have sort of a relatively vivid verbal description of a space and what sort of things it should have in it, then I can spend some time on it. You know, like if it needs scotting or
the thing about
post-its.
The last time, about a week or so ago, I put on the headset and I was impressed, was one of those anniversary moon landing VR experiences. Some of it was rubbish. Some of it was really, I can't believe I'm there. There was one standing on the moon and the space shuttle thing was over there. And that was just, wow, you got the sense of scale. It was incredible for teaching a physical thing. But then on re-entry, I could take my head through the wall of the spaceship and I'm outside, which breaks all physics, right? Which was really, really fascinating. So I'm wondering if in something we build here, we have, you know, because we played with the globe, the earth or whatever, right? Imagine if we have all of this stuff and we through trickery, we have an interaction where you touch something and suddenly you're floating in space looking at dots on a map or whatever, to just really get the whole idea of unlimited space. I don't know.
I'm afraid I have to bow out now. Mom needs me for transport.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Look forward to Friday.
Yep. See you Friday.
Peter.
Have a great week, guys.
You too.
Bye-bye.
You do, yeah.
What are some absolutely fantastical things you guys can think of that if it's created, you would love to take a VR newbie into to experience just this one thing that relates to collective knowledge work?
I think the puppeteering thing is something that I'm going to pursue this week, where you have the ability to puppet things. Something that I'm really excited about is the piloting of non-anthropomorphic forms through the ability to learn specific sort of configurations. So, for example, I don't know, and it's an open question to me, but if somebody operating a large mechanical digger would be better off looking at all of the degrees of freedom of an arm and controlling it like that, rather than the array of handles and levers that it's typically used, where they are controlling one dimension, 2 dimensions at a time at most. by being able to do those. I think it would be really interesting to build a a mechanical arm that people use for that.
Have you done that? Have you used a mechanical digger arm?
I've written one that has those one-dimensional things.
When you come over
before.
to Great Britain for the Future of Text, how long are you staying? If you stay long enough, we're going to take you to the cultural center called Diggerland.
Diggerland, yeah, no, I've heard about that. I haven't worked out. I haven't booked my tickets yet, but
You
I'm
will
thinking about how
absolutely-
long I should come over.
You will love it. We did it because of Edgar, but they keep saying the dadas are the ones who love it the most. We used a full-size digger. It couldn't move. That was locked off, literally. But you have one, this is all you had. And it took us 5 minutes, and Edgar, when he was 4, could operate it with no problem. So the thing you're talking about is so important and interesting. So to compare it with the cognitive load for doing this is really amazing.
Right. Yeah, and Lanier's paper on homuncular flexibility is sort of a case in point there. Another one that I want to do, and my friend sort of pointed out that we're probably pretty close, is like socially negotiated shared limb movement over an augmented environment. So having the ability to have a number of people in a shared scenario in WebXR, sort of basically applying votes for what a shared limb does. I think that would be appealing and interesting to sort of pursue. It's interesting to imagine the future of work, for example, where somebody logs into some kind of hive mind, and they have to pilot, like they need to play their part of moving 5 out of 100 non-anthropomorphic limbs that they're each sharing as voting, as a sort of a mutual voting system between 5 or 6 different people each, so that each limb is moved by that. You have the ability to dynamically, because that's essentially what an organization is. It's just, this is kind of a weird and gross dark crystal kind of representation of it. The Jim Henson film. So yeah, like that's what I'm interested in pursuing. How that relates to text, I'm less sure, but it's going to be fun. So I'm going to try to pursue some of those technical experiments now that we have most of the bones of them available, and the first one is going to be that non-anthropomorphic performance. I had an idea a long time ago of, like, people play paintball, and in paintball you've got to be just infantry people. You can't be tanks, and you can't be various other vehicles. But what if you could? And what if you could have somebody be somebody jump on your back, and then that means that based on the limb movement of you plus them, you have enough additional degrees of freedom that they can be a howitzer or a siege tank or something, and the inclination of their arm represents that. And so as long as that they can understand the shapes and the poses they're making, that they have the ability to kind of perform these things. I think those would be really interesting parts. One of the things I hate about cars is that they appear to be alive, and yet the feedback that we get for them is so dimensionally limited, and the impulse that we're able to give to them about what they do is so limited. If you think about the fact that cats are so complicated, they've got control surfaces, they've got the ability to change the way that they're moving, and the inertial properties they have by swinging their tails around. If you could control not just a spoiler and maybe the sort of a hydraulic angle, but actually swing a mass around on the back of your Lamborghini, then what happens to the concept of handling at that point is just insane. Like, if you look at parkour, the actions that people take in parkour is that they're not just running, they are throwing their mass around for the benefit of that. I mean, that's fundamentally what a tail is for. It's this counterweight that has these prehensile properties. So I feel like in a strictly tangible space, like that's a valuable and interesting thing to be able to do. But I also think that in a sort of a tangible / information hybrid space, those are valuable metaphors for how we can make sense of what we do. And I know, like you said, that this is weird, this is super out there, but you ask, man.
On the driving thing, I think it is really important to look at the other side as well, which is, our skin has at least, I think it's 5 or 6 types of nerve cells. One of them is designed to feel distance. So when you hold a knife, it is what allows you to feel the cutting area. So when you drive a car, there's, of course, depending on the road, there's a huge amount of information the four wheels give your brain through your body, which is absolutely absurd. And of course, we're going to have to try to utilize that. And yes, when I am driving, I do throw the mass of the car around the corners like parkour. I'm fascinated by Edgar's running around and learning his balances and so on. So I just wanted to say that. But these are important and interesting issue. But in terms of sparing a little bit of sugar on the idea of this basic scenario, are there any specific visuals that we can use? I mean, maybe, okay, so I keep writing about snapping your fingers to change the environment. Of course, you can't do that, but you can in VR have links. You know, you touch an object and you activate a link, right? One of the early things you did for this group, Brandel, was this magic carpet of our conversation. Is that available in a format where we can link to it?
Yeah, I can probably also make it so you can drag Quest. That might be challenging. No, I can make it so that it can be drag and drop over a network in the same way that I did with the other stuff. So yeah, I think if that's not up already, it's trivial to put that exact one up. He says, as though although I changed jobs and I don't know where those files are. I'll be able to dig them up.
Okay.
And it's not hard to rebuild. But yeah, that's possible.
Yeah, because what you're talking about is very, very advanced, but I'm just fighting the fight for, you know, someone like Vint Cerf, whom I'm probably going to see on the 26th of September, the day before, and he still hasn't used the damn headset that I sent him. You know, that was an expensive investment. I may ask him to send it to Peter Wasilko because, you know, Peter's just bought a laptop and is not going to invest. But anyway, I would have 15 minutes with Vint. Put a few things on his head. Some of them will be commercial, you know, ready-made things. But if it really helps, just, oh my God, I can't believe this thing. That would just be so useful, just visually. Mark?
Listening to Brenda, I was thinking, I was sort of been riffing on this thing. I really love all this sort of stuff, but I'm thinking to the person who's thinking, okay, so what do I do with work? So, you know, some things like telesurgery or doing, you know, architecture or something, there's an obvious mapping there. Most people can even if they don't do that thing, can see the mapping. But if I'm working in a company, one of it was Brandon's your comment that, well, essentially, you know, they're saying about the shared limb. Well, this is just an organization function. Now that's interesting. So in a sense, whether or not you actually manifest that idea, that make it happen, even the discussion of the idea is quite useful as a way of saying, instead of having to start with something that's very dry, that is a slightly jazzed up version of divisions, north, south, east, and west. No, let's not start at the work from that end. Let's just say, look at this mess. This is you, us, as an organization.
Yeah,
because I think that gives you a whole new way into it. Because in other words, you're not coming from the point of comfort. Like, how does this look like the report that I've got in my hand? I'm worrying about that. Say, well, don't worry about that mapping. That's not the issue. The fun things we can do with that or the profitable, useful things that we and productive things we can do with that come from a sense of understanding and comfort with these other things, because it's these other things of the type we just, Brandon's just describing, that actually allow us to make more of these humdrum things. And I'm coming to see that's perhaps one of the things where we so often, unintentionally step off from the wrong point. Because we're trying to start from where we are, which is often not, like they say in the West Country when you ask for directions, well, you don't want to start from here, mate, and then give you, directions to the next village over. And they're right, because that's the best place to start from.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, like a filter of organizational analysis of the kind that I suspect Bob was getting at, is that an organization is an entity that's responsible for making decisions and taking actions. And the sort of the discursive exhaust that is produced in the context of that is only of secondary importance to what those actual decisions are. And so when you get the shape of the decisions and the actions in a space, then that's the most important thing, and everything that they do in support of that is valid only insofar as it supports those actual primary actions. And that's a really cool, lens to be able to take from looking at organizational analysis that I think is a fun paper.
Another interesting thing that comes out from what you've just said also is to begin to be more flexible in the thinking of that outcomes that seem, especially from above, to seem to be equal may have massively disproportionate amounts of entropy going on inside them. In degree of choice, which is another thing that organizations just tend to elide, because they're not interested in that. They're just interested in the immediate outcome, with the result that they don't invest in the suboptimal elements of how those outcomes are made, because they don't care. As long as it's an outcome, it's sort of that's a level of understanding. So it's another really interesting way of offering engagement. And people say, yeah, I should do more of this, because this allows me to explore something in a way I just cannot at the moment.
Right. None of this is visual, guys.
Well, no, what it means is that there are dimensions to make sense of, which can be rendered visually and spatially. So understanding what an organization is a really valuable component to being able to actually anticipate what is imaginable within the context of it. So, something that Apple doesn't have an org chart, but engineers who have the ability to hook into the systems that see this person is managed by that person, manages these persons, have the ability to rebuild an org chart at will. And it's going to be a partial one. It's going to have certain characteristics based on what it is that they're specifically doing. But people inevitably do that in any organization where those technical capabilities are available. If you start to use those and hold those up against the structure of communication, the process, then certain things start to click into place in the same way as if you were to actually see it as a mechanical system. So you can see, so if you, for example, had the ability to see that org chart and the literal flow of email or other sort of forms of messaging through it, then it would start to have a tangible sense of what it is that organization is actually doing. And that there are some privacy considerations and concerns to relate to that, but having that spatial view of structured organizational communication would be something that would be, I think, elucidating about how an organization functions, and whether there are dark structures within it in terms of where there are actual relationships that aren't sort of related specifically to reporting that people either understand or don't, that are essential for the functioning of that organization. And I think that those are inherently visual. They're supported by having a greater spatial capacity and having the view specs, kind of the flexibility of view that's afforded as a consequence of an immersive spatial medium that you can kind of pinch apart and move in this multimodal way, is, I think, an important component of this, because it can be hard for us to remember as comparative computer experts just how hard it is for people to do things like click and drag. And I've been telling interns a number of times in the last couple of weeks, 90% of people do not know how to find on page on a computer, let alone a phone. And most of the people I've talked to at Apple about find on page in Safari on phone were like, "Oh, you can do that?" It's like, we built this. So the whatever sort of support handles we can give to people for the benefit of being able to understand that views are configurable, they're recoverable, and that they can be used opportunistically to glean certain sort of facets of information. I think we need all the help we can get, and I think that virtual reality and spatial immersive computing is a significant part of supporting and assisting that.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important that we build, foster, and encourage more direct manipulability.
Right.
Yeah, because even I get Command D and Command F confused in my fingers. I know what I want, but they're right next to each other. And that interrupts flow. So yeah. But when it comes to what we're talking about here, we are talking about a problem-solving situation. We could also be talking in parallel about an educational situation. The only problem I have with education is the answer is already known, kind of, which may benefit us. You know, we may have students put up all kinds of things of their perspectives on a wall, and the teacher says, well, let me show you the actual elephant, so to speak.
Yeah, and an inspection of Chalk Talk, you know, Perlin has talked. It's cool that Perlin's talking as well. As you know, he's a neat dude. Invented computer graphics, so that helps. Well, invented several sort of components of it. Yeah, so Chalk Talk, if you haven't watched a good number of different videos about, it's a really, really interesting form of primarily pedagogical kind of visual reasoning. Beyond the sort of the vision statement sort of aspect of it, I don't know if he's concretely used it for specific lessons. It'd be really interesting to find out if that's actually come to fruition or if it's still sort of just that seed, that spark. But yeah, like being able to kind of sketch out dynamic relationships, being able to author and manipulate parameters of those would be essential in a number of social sciences, as well as hard sciences, being able to kind of construct, for example, I know an electromagnetic spectrum and talk about various optical properties of it and things like that. You know, I can see some very, very low-hanging fruit there.
Just looking at our website here. Looking at the VR resources page, what we have. So there's a couple of globe tests. And we have sneaky paste, 360 pictures, Autobook, Spoke demo, Hello WebXR, Wiki VR, etc. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much in this group, and we need to go all over the place. But even if it's just one, not three, even if it's just one. You know, remember, we're general. I mean, let me just ask, Jim, have you put on a VR headset recently, like a Quest 2 or something like that? Sorry, you're muted.
Not in the last 5 years. And my first experience was at the Map Center at Stanford, which is a pretty remarkable place.
Okay. Right, so you really know what we're talking about, because all I'm begging for here is that we build something that somebody, you know, because the first thing that we have experienced with the modern ones, at least my experience, was like, oh my God, this is stable. You know, I move my head a lot, the room doesn't move. That is absolutely incredible. That's the first thing. So the visual fidelity, whether it looks like the real world, doesn't matter, but it looks like there's a there. That's incredible. So if we can just show one single thing where someone puts the headset, a friend loads the page, and there's like, okay, I can see this is a place where when the headset is lighter, the resolution is better, I could work here. That's all we're trying to do.
Well, a thought, and this is literally a thought just bubbling into the mind as you were speaking, and going back, circling all the way back to our idea of sort of, you know, the whatever, I don't know what the method, well, it has so many names, this idea of sort of, you know, group problem solving thing, is that, you know, the fact that you have something that effectively in our starting point is a piece of text, you know, something that somebody's written, is, for instance, doing something in perhaps a manual thing where, I don't know, maybe one way you copy it, you literally just peel a layer off and stick it somewhere else, which otherwise would involve you getting another piece of paper, writing down the same information. It's small beer, but what I'm hinting at is moving to, so that the point is not so much that you're making a copy, because we can make a copy with another piece of paper, but the sort of the ease and fluidity, because the speed with it, you say, oh, right, I need this idea to be over here.
But the problem with that, Mark, is yes, we should write it in the script, in the scenario, but to implement any kind of interactivity is hard and expensive.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of, therefore, the smallest, something really small that speaks to the thing we often bring up, which is about this whole thing of 3 degrees of freedom. And within what I mentioned, I'm sure one could probably sort of pare that down to a minimum. But it's to spark the fact. I mean, one of the other things, two other quick things is, one is that I think problem solving is a problematic term. I remember telling someone when I was working in that sort of field, and someone said, my daughter does that at school. And I thought, yes, but this is a conversation that's going nowhere. You have some very fixed ideas. So it's a problem. And the other thing, in terms of the demo of the book, we won't be able to necessarily sort of inform or change the mind of everyone in the room. So really, if we accept that truth, what sort of a person, what sort of a worldview are we trying to inform with this?
Okay,
because I think it makes it easier to focus our efforts.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, and I would love to see an article on that. But on a more immediate question, so one of my friends, Bjorn, he used his iPhone to scan his garden and turn it into a VR thing you see on the web. But Brandel, if I download the right software on my phone, could I scan this room, somehow send it to you, and you help me make it a VR room, where afterwards we can put things on the wall? I could imagine Vint being in this room, seeing it, put it on, and suddenly everything here is intelligently mapped. So it's almost like AR.
Yeah, absolutely. The guy, what's his name? The guy who makes Sketchfab. No, I don't have it. But yeah, the scanning apps are all really pretty manageable and easy to use, and you can download a USDZ. I actually have a full AR quick look file of my whole house that my friend made when we went in once before I moved back in. And you need to look at it in full size, you need at least the size of the house to do it. But so if you go to a school field, then you can, it's not a big house, but it's yeah. You go to a school field and you turn on AR quick look, then you can walk through my house on that field. And that's pretty cool. Because yeah, you have the ability to represent the exact sort of relative spatiality and then to be able to navigate it. Something that I was talking about with the folks who are supposed to be responsible for marketing AR quick look, and I don't think they ever ended up doing it, which was sad, is to make a full-scale model of Stonehenge, so that you have to go and do it on a field, but then you can walk around and actually capture the scale of it, just through a little phone, because that's the way people do it, but to be able to have some kind of intrinsically navigable space that we have the ability to be able to kind of make sense of, not by virtue of being like, oh wow, look how big it is, but like walk from here to there and go like, look how onerous it is. So you could maybe capture pieces of Buckingham Palace like that and be like, now what do you think about the monarchy?
Right, that's amazing. So what app should I use then to scan this room? Because I was thinking I clear out the room a little bit. We do something amazing. Vint puts his headset on here and interesting things are happening.
So who are the people who started? Cedric and Alvin Denoyel, that's right. So if I go to Twitter, so one of the founders of Sketchfab, which is the YouTube for 3D, Alvin has been doing sort of daily scans, or at some point in the past was doing daily scans, and he was doing them with a couple of apps that he maybe Reality Scan. Reality Scan's a pretty good one. Made with but there are other ones that you can use where you take a number of photos. I think there's one called Object Capture for Mac OS, where if you can take 100 or so photos on your phone, and then you can just drop them in to Object Capture on Mac, and you can get a pretty good one.
Well, there's Polycam. Do you know that one?
Polycam is the one that I use for my house, I think, and it has different granularities of model sort of detail. And that's pretty awesome. It gives you a lot of detail. I suspect that the Apple app object capture captures some additional sort of parameters, but I can't remember whether those are I can't remember where that is, whether that's something that people are sort of guessing or it's true.
That's the problem I'm having
Yeah.
with it. It keeps saying hold still to calibrate. And I
Huh.
can't.
Maybe it's to do with the distance that you're holding stuff at. But
It
yeah.
was in the, I tried it in the garden and all kinds of things.
Maybe the data. So this is Alvin Daniel has a lot of has a lot of capturing tips, and he talked about Polycam and a couple other ones. So yeah, it's worth taking a look. I'm not sure about that. I would be curious if you can take a look at whether that same app functions on someone else's phone while you hold it, or someone else holding it. It might be to do.
It may be that I'm running beta OS iOS, so.
Oh yeah, that's also a possibility. I'm not sure, but yeah, those are really interesting. I agree. I think that would be a really interesting sort of system to be able to capture, and yeah, it'd be interesting to know whether if at such point you get that sort of thing working, whether the Linnean Society would be comfortable with your sort of waving a phone around inside one of those spaces as well, because it's a pretty awesome technique and capability to be able to make use of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to start with my own and it just doesn't do it. Maybe I should download.
Well, yeah, you download a different version, try it on a different phone. You could try various slightly different software. Like I said, like there are ones that are sort of often comparatively where you simply supply a large number of photographs. They don't necessarily have the ability to kind of reconcile the accelerometer data, which is a useful component of it, in order to go like, this was here, and then we moved to the left. But in practice, that sort of can come out in the wash where if you throw enough compute at this estimation of all of these colors and rays, and then a number of things do have the ability to reconcile where all of those things point. So yeah, but definitely a very, very interesting sort of context to do that with. You can do it with scenes, but you can also do that with objects, and to be able to have really high fidelity representations of those. So if you got a book you really like, then that's a pretty cool thing to be able to kind of represent as well.
So if I now manage to make this work and you put it in a way that when you put the headset on, you are there. Two questions. One, can I easily edit what's on the wall? And two, can we put some kind of a virtual object in the center that is like a knowledge amazing, maybe even your magic carpet?
Yes. So when a naively created point cloud scanned object is made, then it's editable, but it's fairly sort of meta in terms of where those things are. So you can paint on it, for example, if you jump into Blender, and that's actually pretty manageable. But you would have a hard time doing the same thing in Photoshop with the texture map, because it's anybody's guess whether this piece of texture is sort of next to on the 2D image, this part there. But when you're in the 3D image, you can just kind of continuously draw over that surface, and so you can spray paint on your own bookshelf if you feel the desire. So yes, you can do those, and then the object should give you the ability to be able to kind of reconcile and put other objects in the space. Yeah, no, that should be fun. I hopefully between some of those apps, and yeah, check out what Daniel says, Alvin Daniel, about the various apps that he uses for his experiments, because there are a range of them, and he has some pretty good opinions and advice about the way of tackling different sort of objects and systems. I have a meeting in 1 minute, so I'm going to have to drop. But this has been really interesting and provocative. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it's been fun. Let's keep thinking. Anybody have any ideas, please share them via email or Twitter, and see you guys on Friday. Oh yeah, we're over time. Bye everyone, unless there's something else from Mark or Jim. Excellent. Okay, bye.
See everyone.